Canada's Air Force was standing at a crossroads. The old CF-18 Hornets, once the pride of the Royal Canadian Air Force, were now aging relics. Their wings still cut through the skies, but every flight carried with it the weight of time, the echo of an era slipping away. Something had to change. Canada needed a new fighter jet, but the question was, which one? On paper, the decision should have been simple. America's F-35 Lightning II was the obvious contender. It was sleek, stealthy, and part of a global network of allies already flying it. But whispers began to spread. Whispers that not everything about the F-35 was as perfect as advertised. Cost overruns, maintenance nightmares, and a dependence on US control raised troubling doubts in Ottawa. Was Canada willing to tie its sovereignty so tightly to Washington's leash? Then came another shadow on the horizon, the Eurofighter Typhoon. Built by a coalition of European powers, it was a proven machine, tested in combat and trusted by NATO allies. But for Canada, there was a problem. It was expensive, and more importantly, it lacked the cold weather adaptability and ruggedness needed to guard the vast, icy frontiers of the Canadian North. The Typhoon was a thoroughbred, but perhaps too delicate for the unforgiving Canadian wilderness. That's when the unexpected name entered the room: Gripen. A jet born not in a Superpowers factory, but in Sweden, a country known for neutrality, forests, and winters harsher than Canada's own. The Saab Gripen wasn't a flashy headline machine. It wasn't built to scare enemies with sheer size, or to bleed billions from government coffers. It was built with a different philosophy: survival, independence, and clever design. Canadian defense analysts began to dig deeper, and what they uncovered shocked them. The Gripen E, the latest evolution of Sweden's fighter, could take off from highways. It could be maintained in remote bases with minimal support. It cost a fraction of what the F-35 demanded, and its open architecture systems meant Canada could customize and control its own destiny, something no American jet would ever allow. But if Gripen was so perfect for Canada, still, the story did not end there, because in the halls of power, decisions are rarely made on merit alone. Lobbyists began to circle like vultures. Industry contracts, political favors, and backroom promises muddied the waters. Gripen was efficient, affordable, and tailored to Canada's needs, but it lacked the one weapon the F-35 had in abundance: political influence. The Canadian public, meanwhile, remained largely in the dark. News headlines spoke vaguely about fighter jet procurement, but the true struggle, the tug-of-war between independence and dependency, was hidden from view. Even pilots were left wondering, what would they be flying in the next decade? And so, Canada's fighter jet saga became more than a defense story. It became a tale of hidden deals, political maneuvering, and the eternal battle between practicality and power. The Gripen was not just a plane. It was a choice no one wanted to talk about openly. But the deeper you look, the clearer the truth becomes. Canada's skies might depend not on the jet everyone expects, but on the one no one dares to speak of too loudly: the Gripen. The debate inside Canada's defense establishment began to resemble a chess match. Each move was calculated, each piece carefully positioned. Publicly, the government spoke of evaluating all options. Privately, however, there was a storm raging. One camp argued that the F-35 was the only realistic choice. After all, Canada was a founding partner in the F-35 program. Billions had already been invested in contracts for Canadian industries tied to the aircraft's production. Turning away from it now would not only anger Washington, but also potentially jeopardize lucrative defense jobs. The political cost of such a decision could be devastating. But then came the other camp, smaller, quieter, but armed with startling evidence. They pointed to Gripen's ability to operate from short, icy runways, its low maintenance costs, and its unique adaptability. They spoke of Sweden's philosophy, a jet designed for survival in hostile conditions, maintained by conscripts. Yet, whenever Gripen's name surfaced in official reports, it seemed to vanish just as quickly, buried beneath layers of bureaucracy. Defense journalists began to notice this odd pattern. Why was a jet so clearly suited to Canada's unique geography being sidelined? Some whispered of US pressure, subtle but relentless. After all, Washington was unlikely to let its closest northern ally slip into the orbit of Swedish defense. Meanwhile, in Sweden, Saab executives made quiet but determined overtures. They offered Canada unprecedented levels of technology transfer, something the US would never allow. Gripen wasn't just a jet to buy. It was a platform Canada could own, modify, and even help produce. It was the dream of sovereignty wrapped in a fighter aircraft. The Canadian public still didn't know the full truth. News headlines reduced the story to simple numbers. This jet costs more, that one costs less. But beneath those numbers lay a struggle for independence. Choosing the F-35 meant embracing dependency on the US for decades. Choosing Gripen meant Canada could finally say, "We control our skies, our software, and our future." But that was the dilemma. Independence often comes with a price. Choosing Gripen risked alienating Washington, risking trade deals, and straining NATO cooperation. Could Ottawa take such a gamble? Behind the closed doors of Parliament, the whispers grew louder. Some politicians warned of retaliation if Gripen were chosen. Others saw in it a chance to break free from decades of reliance on American defense. The debate was no longer just about fighter jets. It was about Canada's very identity. And yet, the public narrative remained vague. The truth was hidden behind technical jargon and procurement reports few ever read. Citizens were told Canada was simply modernizing its air force. But in reality, it was a secret battle over sovereignty, influence, and control. Somewhere in Ottawa, in the shadowed offices where deals... As the decision drew closer, the shadows around Canada's fighter jet deal thickened. Journalists chasing the story began to stumble upon details that didn't quite add up. Why were certain reports heavily redacted? Why were Gripen's advantages downplayed in official statements, while F-35's shortcomings were brushed aside? The deeper they dug, the stranger the picture became. Lobbyists connected to US defense giants were pouring money into campaigns, quietly influencing politicians and shaping media narratives. Contracts worth billions promised long-term dependency. Gripen, on the other hand, represented something those lobbyists feared most: freedom from their grip. And yet, in military circles, pilots and engineers quietly admired the Swedish jet. They saw in it a machine designed with practicality in mind, not politics. A jet that could land on highways, be serviced by a handful of technicians, and return to the air in minutes. For a country like Canada, with vast wilderness and limited infrastructure in the north, such capabilities weren't luxuries. They were survival tools. But Gripen faced its greatest enemy not in the skies, but in the halls of politics. Whispers circulated that choosing Gripen might strain Canada's relationship with Washington. Trade negotiations, intelligence sharing, even NATO collaboration. Everything was potentially at risk. Could Canada afford to anger its most powerful ally for the sake of independence? The mystery only deepened when reports surfaced of secret meetings between Swedish and Canadian officials. Technology transfer, co-production, even the possibility of building parts of Gripen on Canadian soil were offered. But such promises were never highlighted in public announcements. Instead, the narrative remained centered on the F-35. Ordinary Canadians had no idea how high the stakes really were. They were told about modern jets and future readiness, but never about the strings attached. They didn't hear how Gripen could give Canada independence in software, weapons integration. Because sometimes the most dangerous truths are not the ones shouted in public. They are the ones whispered in secret, hidden behind closed doors, waiting for someone brave enough to tell the story. And when it comes to Canada's Gripen deal, the world may never know just how close the nation came to choosing freedom over dependency. Unless, one day, the truth finally escapes the shadows.